The village that stopped praying. There was once a village at the edge of the sea, tucked between jagged cliffs and endless fog. You wouldn't find it on any map. The roads leading in had long since turned to gravel, then to weeds, then to silence. But even silence remembers. This village used to be famous, not for wealth or war or wonders, but for something stranger. Wishes came true here. Not always, not quickly, but they came, and that was enough. Fishermen prayed for calm tides and returned with full nets. Women lit incense for fertility, and babies were born strong. Students left prayer charms at the little hill shrine before exams and passed, even the hopeless ones. Every corner of this village had a place to whisper into the divine. Over 17 shrines in total, each with its own small god. It wasn't religion, it was survival. But then, they stopped. No one prayed anymore. Not out loud, not in temples, not even at funerals. Shrines crumbled, their roofs sagging like mourning heads. Fox statues stared with blank eyes, moss crawling over their once sacred bodies. Wooden prayer plaques rotted on string like forgotten laundry. The sea still sighed nearby, but even it felt further away, as if whatever listened had turned its back. And the people? They whispered. They still left food offerings, but not for the gods. They still bowed, but not to anything holy. And above all, they never spoke their wishes out loud, because when they did, she came. The elders had no name for her. The children weren't supposed to speak of her. But every person in the village, from the quiet fishmonger to the school janitor, carried a look of someone who had seen something once and vowed never to remember it again. A few tourists came in recent years, bloggers, ghost hunters, curiosity chasers. They didn't stay long. Most left with blurry photos and broken cameras. One girl, college-aged, bright-eyed, asked a local if she could interview them about the abandoned temples. The woman didn't speak, just held up a single finger. Not in warning, in silence. Because even talking about prayers was still a form of praying, and praying was dangerous. The story begins not with a scream, but with a boat. Not a fishing boat, not a cargo ship, a prayer boat. The kind villagers used to fold from rice paper, write their wishes on, and float into the ocean on festival nights. These boats were tiny, fragile, sent out during Obon to carry wishes to the sea gods. Except this boat came back. It was the year the fog came early, so thick that the sun looked bruised, like it was drowning. The villagers stood at the pier during the annual festival, watching their paper boats drift out to sea like fireflies on water. And then one boat began drifting back. That was impossible. The tide only went one way. But back it came, cutting clean through the mist, riding a current that shouldn't exist. And inside it, soaked, silent, and staring, was a girl. No one knew where she came from. No boats were missing children. No villages had reported a lost girl. And there were no footprints on the sand, except hers. She was 6, maybe 7. Black hair pasted to her cheeks, skin pale like wet ash. She didn't cry, she didn't shiver, she didn't speak, but she stared. And every person who looked into her eyes, those bottomless, ink-black eyes, felt like she knew what they were about to say before they said it. Some thought she was a gift from the sea. Others said she was a test. But only one old man, a retired shrine keeper, said the truth out loud. No god sends back what was already sacrificed. The villagers took her in, of course. It's what humans do with strays. Feed them, name them, try to believe they're harmless. They named her Shiori, a simple name, meaning bookmark. Something small, something meant to hold a place. She lived in an old storage shed turned sleeping room, fed by a different house each day. Shiori never asked for food. She never played. She never cried. She just listened. Eyes always moving, head tilted as if hearing something too distant for others. Children avoided her, even when adults encouraged them to include her. Dogs barked at her, then whimpered and backed away. And the shrines, they grew silent. Not just empty, dead. No more dreams granted. No more wishes answered. No more warmth in the air after incense burned. At first, no one connected it to her. Why would they? She was just a mute child. But then came the year of the drought. Then the year of the shipwreck. Then the year of the stillbirths. 3 years, 3 warnings. And on the 4th year, the prayers stopped completely. Not one person dared write another wish. Not one paper talisman was hung. Not one prayer boat was folded. Because they knew. They finally understood. She didn't just eat food. She ate prayers. The fishing village still stands, technically. It has a post office, a crumbling school, one half-lit street lamp. But no one moves there. No one leaves either. And most importantly, no one hopes anymore. Because when someone dares to whisper to the gods, Shiori hears it. And if she likes what she hears, she takes it. Not to grant it, but to make sure it never comes true. Every prayer has a price, and she's still hungry. Before the girl came, the prayer boats were beautiful. During the Umi no Matsuri, the festival of the sea, villagers would spend days crafting tiny boats out of handmade washi paper. Each one was delicate but strong, folded with care, painted with red and gold symbols meant to honor the spirits of the ocean. They tied little offerings inside, a coin, a piece of rice, a dried sardine, a flower. Most importantly, they wrote a prayer. Not out loud, never out loud. Just a wish, quietly written and folded away. Some were simple. Safe voyage, a good harvest, my son's cough to go away. Some were heavier. Forgive me. Let her soul rest. I want to live. Then, on the final night of the festival, they lit candles along the pier and released the boats into the sea, watching them drift out like a glowing constellation on water. By morning, the boats would vanish, consumed by the sea, or so they believed. But 1 year, that changed. It was foggy that morning, not uncommon. The village often woke in mist thick enough to hide your own footsteps. But this was different. This fog didn't smell like sea salt. It smelled like paper, like old ink, like wet prayers. The villagers gathered at the shore, expecting to see nothing. The festival was over. Their wishes had been sent. It was done. But then someone gasped. There, through the shifting mist, came a shape. Small, floating, moving toward the shore. No one moved. No one breathed. Because it was impossible. Prayer boats only went one way. This one was returning. As it came closer, the shape grew clearer. It was a boat, but much larger than the ones they made. Still made of paper, yes, but with layers upon layers folded tightly, reinforced somehow. It shouldn't have floated, and yet it sliced across the water like it knew the way. And inside it lay a girl, soaked, silent, alive. The old priest was the first to approach. He stepped into the cold surf, arms trembling not from age, but from something he couldn't name. He reached for the boat and paused. The girl opened her eyes. They were black, not just dark, black, like old ink, like something that had absorbed too many words. He stared into them, and in that instant, he forgot what he was about to say. She didn't cry, she didn't move, she simply watched. The priest stepped back, and the tide pushed her closer, like it wanted her on land. They brought her into the village, wrapped her in towels, tried to feed her warm soup. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't blink for too long. But she stayed, and no one claimed her. No missing child reports, no name tags, no memories. Only one thing marked her as belonging to something, a paper tag, soaked and unreadable, tied around her wrist with string. They unwrapped it and tried to dry it over a fire, but the ink melted away before their eyes, as if the words chose to disappear. A few of the elders whispered that she came from the gods, a gift or a test. Others muttered the word Hinan, untouchable, cursed, a being cast out of both heaven and earth. But she was just a girl, small, quiet, alone. So they gave her a name, Shiori. At first, Shiori did nothing strange. She wandered the village slowly, pausing at shrines and staring at the cracked fox statues. Sometimes she would sit outside the closed temple doors for hours, unmoving, as if waiting for someone inside to answer her. But they never did, because after she came, the shrines stopped listening. It began subtly. One man offered sake at the Inari shrine for his wife's recovery. Nothing happened. The illness worsened. Another woman prayed for her missing brother to return. The sea gave no answer. A child placed a lucky charm at the hilltop altar for good grades. He failed, though he always passed before. At first they thought it was coincidence. Were the gods were angry? Or the offerings weren't good enough? They prayed harder, left more food, burned more incense, knelt longer. Still, silence. And all the while, Shiori watched. Not cruelly, not angrily, just patiently, like someone listening to a song they already knew by heart. One evening, a fisherman followed her. He had noticed something strange. Every time someone prayed near a shrine, Shiori would appear nearby soon after, always alone, always quiet, but always listening. He didn't say a word, just watched from behind a stone wall. That night, she walked up to the shrine, the same one where someone had left a hand-folded prayer envelope tucked beneath the offering box. Shiori looked around, then knelt, slowly. She took the envelope, unfolded it, and put it in her mouth. She chewed it, slowly, methodically, like bread, like ritual. Her eyes closed and a small shiver ran down her spine. Then she swallowed it. The fisherman dropped his lantern. She looked up, saw him, and smiled. Not a child's smile, not a happy smile, but a knowing one. A smile that said, "That was yours, wasn't it?" He left the village the next day. No goodbye, no note, just gone. His house remains empty. His shrine remains cold. And his wish, no one remembers what it was. But whatever it was, it never came true, because it had already been eaten. After that, No one made prayer boats again. They burned the paper, closed the shrines, stopped wishing, because she didn't need temples to hear. She just needed hope, a whispered thought, a quiet plea, a moment of desperation. She could hear it, she would taste it, and if she liked it, she would take it. And the sea that once received prayers now only returns silence.
Shiori never spoke, not once. Not when they pulled her from the boat, not when they dried her clothes, not even when the village doctor pricked her finger and whispered, "Can you feel that?" She just blinked, slowly, like the world moved too fast for her to bother with. People told themselves she was mute, that she couldn't speak, that the sea had stolen her voice, that maybe one day she'd recover it. Maybe with love and patience she'd learn words. They were wrong, because Shiori didn't lack language. She simply didn't need it. By the end of her first week, something became clear. She understood everything, every sentence, every gesture, every unspoken thought. When someone asked a question aloud, she was already moving toward the answer before it finished. When someone stood behind her, she turned before they called her name. When the old fisherman cursed the gods under his breath, she looked up from her food and smiled. The villagers tried not to notice. They tried to pretend she was just an observant child, but deep down, they knew. She didn't learn language. She absorbed it, and not just from mouths, from prayers, from longings, from the tiny cracks between silence and sorrow. She fed on meaning, and what's a prayer if not the rawest form of meaning? She moved like a shadow, not fast, not slow, but inevitable. She would appear outside doorways just before someone was about to cry. She would stand beneath shrines just as someone reached for a talisman. She would walk behind you just when you thought something you never dared say out loud. It wasn't her footsteps that were unsettling. It was her presence. Shiori didn't take up space. She noticed it. You could feel her before you saw her, and when she looked at you, you felt red. Like a book you didn't mean to open, like a secret you didn't mean to think. Some children tried to befriend her. They were told to include her, that she was just different. But children know better than adults when something isn't just anything. One girl offered her a red marble. Shiori took it, held it to her ear, and then dropped it without a word. Another boy drew a picture and handed it to her. She stared at it for a full minute, then folded it into a tiny square, put it in her mouth, and swallowed it. The boy didn't draw again after that. Not once, not ever. He said it felt wrong, like every image he tried to make after that didn't belong to him anymore. The villagers called her the Quiet One. They said it with forced affection, as if naming her could tame her. But behind closed doors, the conversations changed. She's not normal. She listens too hard. I dreamed she was in my house, but the door was locked. She knew my son was sick before I did. She knew I was going to leave my wife, and I hadn't even decided yet. It wasn't what she knew. It was that she knew it before it existed. Shiori didn't just hear your words. She tasted the air before you spoke. And if your thoughts were a prayer, even an unconscious one, she drank them in. One rainy afternoon, a traveling priest came to the village, young, eager, blind to fear. He heard of the abandoned shrines and came to restore spiritual order. He asked questions. He lit incense. He swept temple floors and recited ancient chants. Then he met Shiori. She was sitting alone near the edge of the cliff where a crumbled altar once stood. Rain soaked her hair. Her face was turned toward the sea. Her eyes were closed. The priest approached gently, umbrella in hand. "You don't have to be in the rain," he said kindly. She didn't move. He knelt beside her. "Do you know the gods that used to live here?" She opened her eyes. Black, empty, no reflection of the sky, no trace of light, only depth. The priest felt a tremor rise in his chest, not fear, not yet, but a pressure, like standing before something far, far older than himself. Still, he pressed on. "I can pray for you," he offered. "Even if you can't speak, the gods still—" Her hand reached out, not to touch him, but to hover right over his chest, right over his heart. His breath hitched, his mouth dried, because in that moment, he wasn't a priest, he wasn't a man, he wasn't anything. He was just a wish, raw, naive, exposed. She tilted her head and whispered without words, "That prayer belongs to me now." He left the village that night. He told no one what he'd seen. He burned his robes. He never prayed again. From then on, no more outsiders came. The village sealed itself in. Shiori remained silent, but ever present. And over time, the people adapted, not to her, to surviving her. They stopped hoping aloud. They stopped writing down dreams. They stopped wishing on stars, because every hope had a sound, every dream had a flavor, and if Shiori caught the scent of it, she would come, not to grant it, but to keep it for herself. She never spoke, but every word you didn't say, she heard anyway.
At first, they thought it was a coincidence. When the fisherman's wife miscarried after a full-term pregnancy, the village whispered about bad luck. When the rice paddies flooded on the clearest day of spring, they blamed climate change. When the elders' fever didn't break even after a full week of chants and incense, they blamed modern illness. They did not blame her, not yet. But the prayers stopped working, one after another. Old women who had knelt before the shrine every morning for 30 years found their incense burning without scent. A student left a paper talisman inside the school's fox altar and failed his entrance exam with a score so low it made no sense. A mother cried while tying a wish for her son's safety to a prayer tree. The next day, he broke his leg in 3 places. The village had once been known for answered prayers. People from neighboring towns used to travel here just to light a candle and whisper a request into the wind. Now those same people never came back, because nothing came true anymore. They tried harder. Maybe the gods were tired, maybe they were angry. Offerings increased. They slaughtered more fish, burned more incense, brought back old rituals lost to time. They dug up buried relics from beneath forgotten altars. One man sacrificed his best net to the ocean in a tearful midnight gesture, hoping the sea would forgive whatever had shifted. It didn't. The next morning, dead squid washed ashore, all eyeless. A shrine priest attempted to perform a purification rite. Halfway through the ritual, he collapsed. He forgot the words. His tongue swelled, and the prayer beads turned black in his hands. He said later, in a voice like gravel, "The gods aren't angry. They're gone."
The elders called a meeting, the first in years. They sat in the old community house, staring at each other with hollow eyes and the flickering light of dying candles. No one mentioned her name, but everyone was thinking the same thing. She never caused a scene, never raised her voice, never demanded anything. But prayers had died the day she arrived. One woman tried something bold. She wrote her prayer backwards, syllables jumbled, letters rearranged. She thought maybe, just maybe, if the wish didn't make sense, it wouldn't be noticed. She buried it under the roots of a pine tree, as tradition used to allow. That night, she dreamed of Shiori, not as a girl, as a mouth. A wide, ink-drenched, wet mouth, chewing, on bark, on wood, on a wrinkled piece of paper soaked in meaning even when hidden. The woman woke up gasping. Her throat was dry, her memory erased. She could not remember what she had wished for, only that she had, and that someone else had it now. Some tried writing nothing, blank talismans, blank prayer cards. They folded them, hung them on the shrine, waited. The next day, every blank paper was gone. Shiori had taken those too, because even silence can carry hope. Even an unwritten wish is still a wish. Even a heartbeat can beg. And she heard it all. The village changed. Prayers weren't just abandoned, they were feared. No one dared to whisper dreams, not even to themselves, because they had come to understand one terrible truth. She does not grant wishes. She eats them. The temples began to rot. No one maintained them anymore. Fox statues cracked down the middle. Paper lanterns faded into mold. The gods, if they still lived, had turned their backs. The air grew heavier. The sea grew quieter. Even the wind, once playful through the pine trees, no longer sang. People forgot birthdays, stopped naming babies after deities. Weddings had no altars, funerals had no prayers, because to say something aloud was to risk losing more. They no longer lived in faith, they lived in fear of faith. A child once asked his mother, "What happens if I make a wish?" The mother slapped him, not out of cruelty, out of desperation. She knelt and gripped his face and whispered, "Don't ever do that again, not even in your head," because they knew now it didn't matter how soft the hope was. If it existed, she could smell it. Shiori never changed. She still wandered the village, still stared at the sea, still sat at empty shrines with her eyes half closed. Sometimes she hummed, not a tune, not a melody, just sound. The kind you make when you're chewing something slowly, when the flavor lingers, when you savor sorrow like honey on the tongue. One boy, foolish, brave, or both, tried to test her. He wrote a fake prayer. "I wish for 1,000 bad days." He pinned it to the shrine. Shiori didn't eat it that night. She waited. On the 4th day, the boy's mother suddenly died. His dog vanished. His teacher suffered a heart attack in front of the class. His left ear went deaf for no medical reason. He tried to take the paper down. It was gone. Shiori walked past him the next day, paused, smiled, and mouthed, "You got what you asked for." The boy left the village by foot, never spoke again, never returned. Now no one dared even to pretend. There were no more tricks, no more experiments, no more faith, just survival and silence. Because in that village by the sea, prayers no longer rise, They only fall down into her mouth, where they are chewed and swallowed and never heard again. She doesn't stop your wish from coming true. She stops the world from even knowing it was wished.
He was the last shrine keeper, old, bent, forgotten. His name was Masaru, though no one called him that anymore. To the villagers, he was simply Oji-san, the old man with a back like a fishing hook and eyes like burned paper. He had once served 5 different shrines, lit 1,000 candles, memorized every chant in the Book of Wind. But now he mostly sat, wrapped in moth-eaten robes, watching the world rot. He had known something was wrong from the moment they pulled that girl from the sea. He had felt it in his bones. In the moment her eyes opened, blacker than ink, blacker than the deepest well of regret, he had known this was no orphan. But he said nothing, because even he had prayed once, and even his prayers had stopped working. The shrines fell, one by one, and Masaru did nothing. What was the point? Gods cannot protect you from something older than belief. But then, one night, as he walked by the last shrine still standing, barely, he saw something that stirred his withered spirit back to life. Ash. Ash and footprints, tiny, bare, and damp, trailing from the offering box to the inner sanctum. He stood perfectly still, not from fear, but because the air around him had changed, heavy, sweet, like overripe fruit, like breath soaked in honey and ink. He stepped inside. The inside of the shrine should have been pitch black. The lanterns hadn't been lit in months. No one entered anymore. But that night, something glowed. A faint light, blue, sickly. It came from the altar. And standing before it was her, Shiori, alone, silent, facing away. Masaru didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched. She was holding something, a paper talisman, fresh, still warm with breath. Someone had broken the village's vow of silence. Someone had prayed. Shiori lifted the talisman slowly, held it in both hands. Then she tore off a corner and placed it on her tongue. Her eyes fluttered shut. Her mouth began to move, not in chewing, but in feeling, like the paper melted, like it became something soft, something familiar, something delicious. Then she took another bite and another, until the entire prayer was gone. Masaru's knees trembled. He'd seen many rituals, offerings, sacrifices, ceremonies, but never consumption. This wasn't devotion. This was appetite. He stepped forward. A floorboard groaned beneath him. She turned, not with a jolt, not with fear, with certainty, as if she had known he was there the entire time. Her eyes met his. They didn't glow, they didn't burn, they simply understood everything. Masaru opened his mouth, not to ask, not to accuse, just to speak. And then he forgot how. His tongue turned to smoke. His thoughts unraveled like torn thread. His voice, the one that had prayed over births and deaths and storms, was simply gone. Shiori tilted her head. Then she smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. She stepped forward. Masaru wanted to move. His legs refused. She reached up and touched his chest, right over his heart. The warmth of her fingers was unbearable. Not hot, not cold, just full,
like they carried weight he couldn't carry himself. And in that instant, he remembered every prayer he had ever spoken. They flooded back in a wave. A child's plea for her mother to survive, a wife's tear-stained wish for her husband to return from the sea, a lonely boy begging for the bullying to stop, a farmer praying for rain that never came. He had carried them all, and now, so had she. Then Shiori leaned forward, placed her forehead against his, and whispered into his mind, a voice that was not hers, not human, not new. They weren't yours to offer. Masaru collapsed. They found him the next morning, curled like a prayer scroll on the shrine floor, alive, but different. He couldn't speak, couldn't write, couldn't even cry. He simply sat, day after day, staring at nothing, lips moving silently. Some said he was praying. Others said he was trying to remember what praying meant. But no one joined him. No one asked what happened. Because when the villagers saw the bite-marked altar cloth, when they saw the faint trail of ash leading from the prayer box to the sea, they understood. That was the last prayer anyone dared write. That was the night they locked the shrine doors for good. That was the final breath of faith in the village. And Shiori? She returned to the cliff that overlooked the water. She sat there every day, head tilted, eyes closed, waiting. Because someone, someday, always breaks. And when they do, she'll hear it. She always does. She doesn't need to steal your prayers. You hand them to her the moment you hope.
Not all prayers are for miracles. Some are for mercy. Some are for forgiveness. Some are just apologies the heart can't say out loud. And those, it turns out, are the sweetest. Because when you pray for something to leave, guilt, shame, regret, you're offering a part of yourself, a wound, a crack, a sin. And Shiori, she loves those most. It began with the carpenter, a man with rough hands and a quiet past. He lived on the edge of the village near the broken torii gate that no one dared repair. Years ago, he had been the first to stop praying, not out of fear, but because, as he said, "The gods are tired of me." He had built his own altar, tiny, crude, just a plank of driftwood nailed to a tree. No incense, no candles, just a slip of paper hidden beneath a stone, written in trembling hand, "I'm sorry I let her drown." That's all it said. No name, no plea, just that. No one ever knew who her was, but Shiori did. She stood at the edge of the woods the night he placed it, watching, waiting. And when he left, she walked to the stone, lifted it gently, took the paper in both hands, and ate it. Not hungrily, not like the first time in the shrine. This was different. She unfolded the paper slowly, almost reverently, brought it to her nose, smelled it as if regret had a scent, then pressed it to her lips like a kiss, and bit down. It dissolved on her tongue, and she smiled, eyes closed, chin tilted to the wind, a single word mouthed silently, "Delicious." The next morning, the carpenter was gone, his tools untouched, his home silent, his shrine empty. But on the floor of his cabin, someone found a pile of curled paper, dozens of them, all blank, all folded the same way. Some say they were prayers he had written and never dared offer. Now, he never would, because Shiori
had already taken the one that mattered. After that, the flavor changed. She no longer visited just the shrines. She walked past doorways and paused when someone felt ashamed. She stopped under windows just as someone whispered, "Forgive me," to the night. She stood outside a schoolroom where a teacher cried silently over punishing a student too harshly. And each time she reached into her sleeve and pulled out a tiny slip of paper, blank to the eye, but soaked in meaning. She would eat it, slowly, and when she did, the person inside would feel nothing, no shame, no peace, just emptiness. Because Shiori didn't just take guilt, she devoured redemption.
A priest once said, "We pray not to be forgiven, but to believe we can be. But if someone else holds your apology in her mouth, how can you believe in anything?" There was a girl named Aiko, barely 16. She came to the village to live with her aunt after something terrible happened back home. She never spoke of it, but each night she folded a small note and tucked it under her pillow. No one knew what it said. One night, her aunt woke to find Shiori in the hallway, not moving, not knocking, just standing outside Aiko's door, eyes closed, mouth open slightly, breathing in. The aunt shouted, ran at her, tried to push her away, but Shiori turned and whispered for the first time ever, one word: "Mine." When Aiko woke up the next day, she was smiling, peaceful, calm, but empty. She didn't speak for the rest of the week, didn't eat, didn't cry, didn't dream. And on the 7th night, she walked into the ocean. They never found her body. Only her pillow remained, torn open, feathers scattered, and beneath it, the faint scent of ink. It became clear then, Shiori didn't just feed on wishes, she feasted on confessions, on the things we whisper when no one's listening, on the apologies we never say out loud, on the forgiveness we hope we deserve. She consumed them, not to forgive, not to release, but to erase. And without those, what are we? The villagers stopped saying, "I'm sorry," stopped writing journals, stopped speaking to the dead, stopped asking for mercy, even in their minds, because Shiori could smell guilt like blood in the water. And the moment you offered it, even silently, she came. Not with malice, but with hunger. Masaru, the old shrine keeper, still sat at the ruined altar. One day a boy approached him, whispered something. The boy walked away smiling. But that night, Masaru began to cry, and he never stopped. Tears rolled down his cheeks for days, weeks. They tried to speak to him. He only repeated one word: "She took my chance." Not his life, not his health, not his hope. His chance to be forgiven. It was gone, because Shiori had swallowed it. There are monsters that eat flesh. There are demons that steal souls. But this one, this girl, she ate something deeper. Meaning. She consumed the fragile string between guilt and grace, and once it's gone, nothing is left but silence. She doesn't just devour what you ask for. She devours the very act of asking. It wasn't sudden. That's the cruelest part. When a plague arrives, it usually knocks. It burns fever through a village, fills the air with coughs and wails, and makes itself known. But this spread like fog, slow, silent, soft. No rashes, no fever, No bodies stacked in doorways, just absence. Absence of hope, absence of trust, absence of anything worth believing in. It began in small ways. A girl stopped singing while washing laundry by the river. No one noticed until someone realized they hadn't heard music in weeks. A father used to carve toys for his son after dinner. Then one day he stopped, not because of work, not because of exhaustion, but because he couldn't remember why he used to. A couple, once inseparable, sat across from each other at breakfast with blank eyes and spoons in silent bowls. They weren't fighting, they weren't tired, they just were. Living, eating, breathing, but without desire. Then came the dreams, if you could call them that. People stopped remembering them, woke up with the feeling that something had been taken, not stolen, consumed, like a word on the tip of your tongue, like a memory you almost had until you blinked. And always in that fading moment between sleep and waking, they saw her. Not up close, not clear, but a figure just beyond the rice paper walls of the dream. Hair dripping, eyes closed, head tilted like she was listening, and then gone, leaving only silence. Children forgot how to play. Elders forgot why they used to pray. Lovers forgot why they ever whispered each other's names in the dark. Not because something was taken, but because something had been fed. The sickness didn't make people die. It made them forget why they were alive. Even the sea changed. It stopped crashing, stopped roaring, just pulsed, like something asleep or drugged. Fishermen stopped going out, not because the fish were gone, but because no one remembered how it felt to want them. Hunger remained, but not for food, for feeling. That was the sickness. Not pain, not death, but numbness. And Shiori, she thrived. Because when people are numb, they become quiet. And when they're quiet, their souls whisper louder. That's when she comes. When a mother stares out the window and wonders, was there more than this? When a boy grips a dull pencil and thinks, why bother? When a widow lies awake and feels nothing, not even grief, only blank space, that's when she feasts. Because doubt is its own kind of prayer, and she hears every one. A teacher left his classroom mid-lesson, walked into the forest, and never returned. A baker forgot his own recipes, stared at the flour like it was snow. A newborn refused to cry. Not stillborn, not sick, just silent, eyes open, watching, like her. The village began to rot from the inside. Houses stood, fires burned, meals were made, but no one laughed, no one hoped, no one wished. The word tomorrow lost its meaning, and still Shiori walked. Not floating, not supernatural, just present. Always one street over, always one corner ahead, like an echo of something you never meant to say, but did. And now, it's too late to take it back. They tried to fight it. They hung charms again, burned incense, even tried to pray together, thinking numbers could protect them. But she came that night, walked
past every doorstep where words had been offered, and by morning every charm was ash, every candle cold, and every person who had joined in that prayer woke up empty. Their eyes were open, their mouths still moved, but their spirits gone. The sickness wasn't hers alone. It had become the new god of the village, and Shiori, she was its priestess, not by title, not by ritual, but by hunger. A hunger not for food or blood or power, but for meaning, for the fragile, flickering desire that lives at the heart of every soul. The want to be seen, the need to be forgiven, the ache to be more. And once she eats that, you're still alive, but you're not you anymore. One day, a man stood in the square. He screamed at her, threw a rock, called her a demon, begged for the village to wake up. She walked past him, didn't look, didn't flinch, just paused and whispered something, not to him, but into the space between them. The next day, he was still standing there, same spot, same stance, but with eyes that no longer blinked. And when a child asked him what he was doing, he said, "Waiting for something, but I forget what." The sickness spread because no one knew it was a sickness, because it didn't kill. It just took the part of you that mattered most, the part that wanted. And without that, you're quiet, you're safe, you're hers. She doesn't need to haunt you. She just waits until you forget who you were, and then she remembers for you.
His name was Kenji Mori, 32, lecturer in folklore studies at a small university in Tokyo. Mildly respected, largely ignored. He specialized in residual rituals, forgotten spiritual practices that left behind traces in culture long after their gods had died. Students found his lectures boring. His colleagues called his research poetic nonsense, and his department was on the verge of cutting funding, until he found it. A footnote, one line, in a dusty prefectural archive buried under tax records from 1931. The fishing village of Kurokami ceased all formal prayer activities in Meiji year 43. Reasons undisclosed. Shrine activity permanently suspended. That wasn't normal. Villages might shift beliefs, temples might close, but for an entire coastal community to collectively abandon prayer? That wasn't history. That was trauma. Kenji packed his bag that night. The train took him as far as it could. The rest, a bus, then gravel road, then mist, and finally, the sea. What he saw was impossible. The village wasn't abandoned, but it felt like it should be. People moved, but like sleepwalkers. Shops stood open, but without transaction. Shrines existed, but not a single one had flowers, incense, or footprints. It was like watching a painting that refused to age. And in the middle of it all, silence. Not just the absence of noise, the presence of quiet. The kind that pushes into your ears and fills the empty parts of you. Kenji asked questions. He received stares. He spoke to a shopkeeper. The man blinked and handed him dry seaweed. He approached a woman sweeping leaves from her doorstep. She paused, looked at him, then swept him away too. No one would speak, but everyone watched. On the second night, Kenji stood at the cliffside overlooking the sea. The fog rolled in like a living thing, and the wind carried no bird song. He was about to leave when he saw her, standing on the rocks, just above the waves, barefoot, unmoving. A girl in a tattered white dress, hair down to her waist, skin pale as the moonlight. She didn't notice him, or pretended not to, but something about her posture made his heart hitch. Not in fear, in recognition, because he'd read this before, in myths, in scrolls, in forgotten chants and oral tales. The girl returned by the sea. The next day, he searched through temple ruins, shrine remains, village records. Most were missing, some burned. Others had been rewritten, black ink over white lies. But in an old fisherman's home, tucked behind broken plates, he found it. A prayer slip, water-stained, torn, but legible. Please, do not let her come back. That night, Kenji dreamed, not of the village, not of the girl, of paper, hundreds, no thousands of prayer slips raining from the sky. Some wept, some bled, some screamed without mouths, and in the middle, floating above them, was her, eyes closed, mouth open, chewing. Every bite echoed like thunder. Kenji awoke, gasping, and standing at his window was her, Shiori. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She just stared. Not with hate, not with curiosity, with knowledge. Like she had already read everything he came here to discover. Kenji whispered, trembling, "What are you?" She blinked, tilted her head, and then smiled. Not because it was funny, not because it was cruel, but because the question itself was a prayer, and he had just offered it to her. The next morning, he found a shrine keeper's diary in a burned chest near the main temple. Most pages were ruined, but one survived, scorched at the edges, ink faded, but still intact. The girl in the boat is not a god. She is the mouth the gods left behind. She eats what we can no longer bear to carry, and in doing so, she becomes what we fear most, the end of need. That night, Kenji tried to leave, but the bus stop was gone, the road swallowed by fog. He turned back toward the village and saw every house with its door slightly open, as if waiting, as if inviting, as if listening. And Shiori? She was already inside one of them. Not hiding, not haunting, just waiting for the next offering. Because now she had something new. Not just villagers, not just broken fishermen, but a scholar. A man who believed in the power of belief. And belief is the most tender kind of meat. She isn't a legend. She's the echo of every wish the sea refused. And now, you've wished again. Kenji couldn't stop staring at her arms. He first noticed it during a foggy afternoon when Shiori stood on the shoreline with her sleeves rolled up. Her skin, once pale like wet rice paper, now bore faint marks, not scars, not bruises, but script, not written with ink, not drawn by hand,
They looked like they had grown from within her. Black characters, faded, curving like whispers around her wrists and forearms. Some were in kanji, others were older, Shinto sigils, lost to modern tongues. A few were shapes that didn't belong to any language, just markings that felt like they meant something, even if no one could read them. Kenji felt his breath catch. He stepped closer. The words shifted slightly under her skin, as if listening, as if they knew he was watching. And then they faded, like ink soaking into cloth. Gone. That night he couldn't sleep. He tore through his notes, his folklore archives, his grandfather's shrine books. He searched every reference he could remember about sacred markings, spiritual tattoos, divine possession. But none of them matched this, because all sacred markings were for protection. These, they were for memory. The next morning, Kenji approached her again. She was standing at the edge of the abandoned schoolyard, barefoot in the dew, watching rusted swings creak in the breeze. The fog wrapped around her like a second skin. He spoke softly. "Do they hurt?" She didn't turn, didn't blink, just raised her left arm. And as the sunlight passed through the fog, for just a moment, he saw them again. Names, dates, sentences, some long, some short. One said, "Please let my baby live." Another, "Forgive me for the accident." Another still, "Don't let him find me." Each one etched like a fading echo beneath her flesh. Kenji whispered, almost involuntarily, "They're still alive in you." Shiori lowered her arm, and for the first time, he saw a flicker in her face. Not cruelty, not satisfaction, but weight, a heavy, ancient weight, like someone carrying more than she ever asked for. He began to follow her, not like a spy, but like a scholar chasing the truth he wasn't sure he wanted to find. Everywhere she went, someone nearby seemed to lose something. A fisherman forgot his daughter's face. A woman no longer remembered why she'd married her husband. A child stopped speaking, not because he couldn't, but because he no longer believed words had meaning. And Shiori? She walked among them. Not collecting, not objects, not memories, but intention. Kenji began to keep his own journal, but the pages came out blank. Not because he forgot, because the ink disappeared, faded overnight. Sometimes the words rearranged themselves. One entry meant to say, "She walked along the shore again today," changed "I'm mourning" into, "She carries us all, one by one, until nothing remains but her." He tried burning the pages. The fire wouldn't catch. He tried typing instead. The screen froze. Only when he carved his notes into wood, using a blade, did they stay. Pain, it seemed, was the only protection from erasure. One night, while walking past the old temple ruins, he saw her again. But she wasn't alone. She stood before a mirror, an old, cracked ceremonial one, half buried in moss and dust. She had removed her outer robe. Her back was bare and covered. From neck to spine to shoulder blades, her skin was a library. Thousands of prayer marks. Some bled into each other. Some curled into spirals. Some were so deeply embedded they looked like veins. And in the center of her back, one word repeated over and over. "Please." Kenji gasped. and she turned, caught him. Not surprised, not angry, just calm. She approached him slowly, reached out, took his hand, and placed it on her shoulder. The marks moved beneath his palm. He could feel them pulsing, like heartbeats, like whispered voices trying to rise, but being pulled back down again and again. She looked him in the eye and mouthed a single word: buried. That night, Kenji dreamed of drowning in paper. The water wasn't cold, it was made of wishes. Each wave said his name, each prayer slipped into his ears, into his throat, into his lungs. And beneath it all, her eyes, watching, waiting, weighing. When he woke, there was a mark on his arm. One single character, faint but real. He looked it up. It meant remember. From that day forward, he understood she wasn't erasing prayers, she was storing them. Inside her flesh, inside her silence. Not because she wanted to, because someone had to. The gods were gone, the shrines had fallen, but prayers still came. And if no one answered them, she would consume them. Not to grant them, but to hold them, so the world wouldn't be crushed under the weight of its own desperation. Her skin is a graveyard, every word unspoken, every plea unanswered, etched in silence, carried by the girl who was never meant to survive.
His name was Riku, young, clean-shaven, fresh from Kyoto. A monk in training, ambitious, idealistic, and burning with the kind of spiritual certainty only those untouched by true darkness possess. He had heard whispers of the village, of a place where shrines had gone silent, where prayers dissolved before reaching the sky, where people forgot how to want. To him, it wasn't folklore. It was a call, an opportunity. If he could purify this place, restore even one altar, he would rise beyond his monastery. He wouldn't just be a monk, he would be remembered. He arrived barefoot, wearing only his robe and prayer beads. He bowed to every person he passed. No one bowed back. Children hid behind doors. Women stared through him. The men turned away as if his presence made them uncomfortable. He assumed they were ashamed, but it wasn't shame. It was warning. He found the old shrine at the edge of the sea, broken, weathered, forgotten. Perfect. He swept the steps, lit incense, placed salt in the corners, chanted under his breath for an entire hour. Nothing stirred. No wind, no birds, just fog, and the faint taste of ash on his tongue. Still, he felt proud. He had done what no one else dared. He turned toward the village and saw her. She stood at the base of the stairs, Shiori, small, still, eyes half closed. He had read about her in the temple's hidden archives, the girl in the boat, the vessel of sorrow, the eater of ink. A ghost, they claimed, a curse, a story to frighten children. But she was no ghost. She was breathing, alive, real. Riku stepped forward and bowed deeply. "I've come to cleanse this place." She said nothing. He smiled, gently, as monks are taught. "You've suffered, haven't you? You don't have to carry this alone." Still silence. He opened his pouch, retrieved a folded charm, hand-painted in gold ink,
and offered it to her, a blessing of release. "For you can be free." She tilted her head and slowly reached for the charm. Her fingers brushed the edge, then paused, then crushed it, crumpled it into her palm, raised it to her mouth, and ate it. Riku froze. This is sacred," he whispered. She chewed slowly, then opened her eyes, and for the first time, he saw what lived behind them. Not rage, not cruelty, but the weight of 10,000 unanswered voices. He took a step back. "You're not cursed." She blinked. "You're full." That night, he meditated beside the shrine. He tried to chant, to remember the sutras, to recite mantras that had once flowed effortlessly from his lips. But the words slipped. His tongue felt thick. His breath stuttered. Every syllable he formed melted away into mist before it reached the sky, because she had tasted his intention, and now it belonged to her. The next morning, he spoke to no one. He wandered through the village like a man waking from a dream he no longer understood. At noon, he tried again. He sat before the shrine, folded his legs, placed his hands in his lap, and whispered a final prayer. "Return what is not mine." A gust of wind blew, salt scattered, and from the edge of the cliff she came. Shiori, barefoot, hair tangled by the sea air, arms streaked with fresh marks. She knelt in front of him, stared into his eyes, and leaned forward. He didn't move, not in fear, but in surrender. He thought, "She will devour me now, my thoughts, my past, my name." But she didn't. She only whispered, not with her mouth, but with her presence. "You prayed to be remembered." He opened his mouth to deny it, but she pressed one finger to his lips, and everything went still. They found him hours later, eyes open, breathing, smiling faintly, but empty. He walked back to Kyoto the next day, said nothing, never wore his monk robes again. He took a job cleaning public baths, forgot how to chant, forgot what temples felt like, but sometimes when alone, he'd whisper, "She did not take my voice. She took the reason I needed one." In the village, no one mentioned him again. No one repaired the shrine. But if you look closely at the steps, you'll find one new mark, carved into stone, barely visible. A single character. Silence. Because not all who speak can be heard, and not all who are silent have nothing to say. Some carry voices so heavy, so loud, so unbearable, that silence is the only way to survive. He came to cleanse her, but she was already clean. What she carried wasn't filth. It was the weight of everything no one else wanted to feel. Kenji always believed that names held power. In ancient texts, to know something's true name was to hold dominion over it, to bind it, summon it, protect it, or destroy it. Names weren't just labels, they were truths wrapped in sound. So when he realized no one in the village knew or remembered Shiori's birth name, he knew something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Because even foundlings were given a name by the sea. Even the dead had names carved in stone. Even ghosts, in legend, whispered the names they once had. But Shiori, she had none. Or worse, she had one that had been erased. He began digging. Not in the dirt, but in forgotten places, behind abandoned schools, under shrine floorboards, in rotting drawers inside mold-eaten houses, and eventually, in the collapsed archives of the old mayor's home, beneath a shrine painting warped by salt air, he found it, a bundle of sealed prayer slips, wrapped in ceremonial rope, tied with red threads, and blackened by something that smelled like burnt seaweed and old blood. Kenji hesitated, then untied it. Inside were 12 slips of paper, each one written in old formal script, each one a plea. Protect our village. Take this offering. Let her silence be enough. We give her to you. Take her name. Let her be nothing. And finally, the last one. If she ever returns, we will not speak of her. We will not remember her. We will not write her name again. May forgetting be our only shield. Kenji dropped the bundle. His breath caught, because this wasn't just a ritual. This was a sacrifice. He spent the night reading through a centuries-old legend about coastal villages that worshipped sea gods, not through praise, but through tribute. Every 30 years, they sent out a fushisha, the silent one, a child chosen by omen or birth defect, always mute, always unwanted, placed in a paper boat, set adrift, a vessel not of prayer, but of burden. The belief was simple. The sea would take what the land could not bear. Sometimes the boat never came back. Sometimes it did. Kenji's heart froze, because the records showed something else. Over a century ago, during a storm that shattered 5 boats and took 12 lives, the villagers sent out a silent one.
A girl, 7 years old, mute, born under a blood moon. Her name was never recorded, because names were believed to bind her spirit to the shore, and she had to belong to the sea. But she didn't drown. She returned, years later, in another boat, still mute, still watching, as if the sea had tried to swallow her and choked. Kenji closed the book. His hands trembled. He whispered to the wind, "Who are you, really?" And from behind him, a voice, not loud, not soft, just true. "You already know." He turned. She stood there, Shiori, eyes glinting in the dark like oil on water. She held out her hand, and in her palm was a single slip of paper, faded, wrinkled, but still intact. He took it, unfolded it. Inside, one word, a name, not in modern script, but in ancient characters, barely legible. His throat tightened, because the name wasn't Japanese, it wasn't human. It was a word of absence, of erasure, of something removed so completely from the world that only the echo remained. A name never meant to be spoken again. He tried to read it aloud and choked. Blood filled his mouth, his vision blurred. Shiori stepped closer, touched his lips, and shook her head. "Not yours," she mouthed. Later, when Kenji awoke alone on the floor, the slip of paper was gone. But the name still echoed inside his skull like thunder behind glass. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a sound.
It was a weight, a curse wrapped in memory, a reminder that what had been offered was never meant to return, but somehow it had. She wasn't just a girl. She wasn't even just a vessel. She was the unfinished ritual, the offering that couldn't be consumed, the prayer too heavy for the gods to carry, so they returned her, empty of voice, full of everyone else. You do not name what you fear. You do not name what you regret. You do not name the one you tried to forget and who remembered everything for you. The sea was never truly quiet. Even when still, it hummed. Even when calm, it listened. And now, it had begun to speak back. Not in waves, not in wind, but in consequences. It started with the fish. They stopped coming. The nets were drawn empty, day after day, no matter how far the boats drifted or how deep the lines sank. The fishermen blamed the season, the current, the changing waters, but they knew the sea wasn't giving, it was withholding, because something had broken the pact. The villagers had sent their offerings, their prayers, their pain for generations into the tide. In return, the sea gave bounty. Storms passed them by. Children were born strong. Harvests survived, but not anymore, because someone or something had stolen the offerings before they reached the depths, and the sea remembered. Next came the tide. It began arriving early and staying longer. Waves climbed further inland. Salt water crept into the rice paddies. Wells soured. Foundations cracked. And the fog grew thicker. It rolled in even at midday, clinging to walls, smothering color, swallowing sound. Sometimes you could hear faint splashes from places no water should be, dripping, dripping, like tears from a god's closed eyes. One night, a baby cried until its voice cracked. By morning, the mother found it staring silently at the ceiling, eyes wide, not blinking. On the window, drawn in condensation, was a single shape. A boat, folded, floating, drifting back. The sea had not forgotten what the village had done. It remembered the ritual. It remembered the silence. It remembered her. And it remembered that she was supposed to be gone. Kenji stood at the cliff's edge, watching the surf gnash against the rocks. His journal fluttered in the wind, pages damp from spray. Behind him, the village was crumbling. In front of him, the horizon pulsed with something wrong. Not storm, not ship. Something older. Something returning. He thought of the old prayer slips, the ones that begged, "Take her name, erase her. Let the sea consume what we cannot." But they had lied. They hadn't offered her. They had discarded her, and the sea knew the difference. It was no longer punishment. It was rebalancing. For every wish that had been whispered and stolen, for every prayer consumed before it sank, the sea sent back a silence in return. A silence so thick you could drown in it. The villagers tried to leave. The main road collapsed in a mudslide. The mountain path was swallowed by fog that didn't lift for 7 days. Boats drifted out and returned empty. One man tried to swim. His body came back bloated, lips stuffed with shredded paper.
prayer paper. And Shiori? She changed. Not outwardly, not suddenly, but something inside her began to shift. She stood at the water's edge more often now, not watching, listening. Sometimes she whispered, not to the villagers, not to Kenji, not to herself, but to the sea. No one could hear what she said, but the waves rippled in answer, as if the ocean understood her now. Or perhaps it always had. Kenji once tried to ask her, "Do you remember the boat?" She nodded, then placed a finger on her lips and whispered, "It remembered me first." The sea began returning other things, things no one had asked for. Old buoys from the war, rusted fishing knives, a bell from a shrine long believed lost, a child's shoe from a child who had vanished a decade ago. All washed ashore, all untouched by time, all bearing faint traces of ink, not blood, not seaweed, ink, as if the prayers that had once been stolen were now being spat back, half digested, unanswered, unwanted. And the dead, they began to whisper. Not ghosts, not shadows, just memories rising like steam from the water. Fishermen reported hearing their mothers singing lullabies from beneath the waves. A blind man claimed the sea called his name in his wife's voice, and she had died in childbirth 20 years ago. Children cried in the night, saying someone was knocking on their windows with wet fingers. And on the beach, Shiori would walk, barefoot, alone, head tilted, as if translating a language no one else could hear. Because the sea was speaking, and only she could understand. One night, Kenji dreamed again. He stood on the shore, the tide at his knees, the stars gone, the world quiet. And in the water, boats, thousands of them, all made of paper, all carrying prayers, twisted, smeared, torn. And in the center, floating above them, Shiori, eyes closed, mouth open, arms spread. But she wasn't devouring them. She was returning them. Each prayer she had eaten exhaled like a cloud of ash and ink, drifting back into the tide. And the sea swallowed them again, this time with fury. Kenji awoke, coughing black water. His room was dry, his lungs were not. On his chest, drawn in salt, was a symbol, the kanji for debt. The sea hadn't forgotten. It had only waited. Waited for the day when the weight of stolen wishes would become too heavy to carry, even for her. The sea does not forgive. It does not forget. It remembers every offering it never received. And now it comes to collect. Children forget faster than adults, but they also remember differently. They don't carry facts, they carry feelings, atmosphere, tone, tension. Even if they don't understand the words, they feel when something is wrong. And something in the village had always been wrong. The school had stayed open, technically. A crumbling building with one working hallway, 2 flickering lights, and a classroom filled with 10 children too quiet for their age. They studied, they obeyed, but they didn't laugh. Until one afternoon, they did. It started as a whisper during recess. A girl named Nami dared another boy, Hiro, to say her name. But no one remembered it. So they invented one. Not Shiori, they'd never heard that. They called her the Boat Girl. They played a game. The rules were simple. You go into the old bathroom alone. You turn off the light. You close the door. You stand in front of the cracked mirror. You whisper, "I wish she'd take me instead," 6 times in a row. Then you wait. The children laughed nervously, pretending it wasn't scary, even though none of them had made up the last line, even though no one remembered who first said it, even though they all said it the exact same way. The first few times it was a dare, giggling behind the bathroom door, footsteps echoing down the hall, someone screaming for fun, running back out, flushed with adrenaline. But then, it worked. A boy named Ren was the first. He followed the rules, laughed when nothing happened. But when he got home that evening, he went silent. Not scared, not crying, just silent. He didn't eat, didn't answer, didn't sleep. At 2:14 a.m., his mother found him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, and in his hand, a paper boat, soaked, chewed around the edges. He never spoke again. The game spread. Children are drawn to danger when they don't understand it, or when they do, but no one is watching. Soon, even the ones who swore they wouldn't play did. Some felt a cold hand on their shoulder. Some saw ink drip from the mirror. One girl said the reflection didn't blink when she did. Another said she heard whispering, "I already took you. You just haven't noticed yet." Teachers grew nervous. One tried to bam the bathroom, put tape on the door, locked it with a key. The next morning, the lock was gone, and taped to the door was a new rule. She doesn't need keys, just your willingness. Kenji heard about the game through the grocer's daughter. She didn't say much, just stared at him with glassy eyes and asked, "If I ask her to take me instead, will she take someone else anyway?" He didn't answer, because he didn't know, because no one did, because rules don't apply to something born from broken prayers. He went to the school that night. The halls smelled of damp wood and chalk. The bathroom door stood open. Inside, the mirror, cracked, old, but intact. He stepped in, turned off the light, stood still, and whispered, "I wish she'd take me instead." Once, twice, 3 times. The air grew heavy. His breath turned visible. Ink began to bead along the edges of the mirror. 4, 5. He hesitated. On the 6th, his voice trembled. "I wish she'd take me instead." Nothing. Then, a knock from behind the mirror. Slow, soft, wet. He ran. The next morning, there was a message scratched into the mirror's glass, backwards, but still legible. "You have nothing worth taking." More children stopped speaking. One began writing backwards in class, characters none of the teachers could read. Another refused to step on shadows, claiming she lives there. A third tore out her own tongue from a drawing, literally ripped
the page in half where her mouth had been drawn. And still, they played. Because children believe in rules, even deadly ones, especially if the rules are whispered in their sleep. Parents panicked. They blamed television, internet, books. No one dared blame her. But every child who played the game eventually began to draw the same thing over and over. A girl with ink running down her chin, hands full of folded paper, eyes empty. And in every drawing, behind her, a mirror, cracked, but watching. Kenji collected the drawings. He laid them across the floor of his room. There were 27, every one different, every one the same. He stared at them for hours, until he noticed something. Each drawing, in the top left corner, nearly invisible, contained a word, backwards, hidden in lines, folded into shadows. A word he'd seen before. The name. Her true name. The one not meant to be spoken. And when he whispered it aloud, the mirror in his room cracked from the inside. Children do not invent nightmares. They inherit them. And sometimes they pass them around like toys.
Kenji knew he couldn't fight her with fire. She was born of silence, and silence couldn't be burned. But maybe she could be tricked, because for all her power, the knowing, the watching, the swallowing, there was one constant he had noticed. She responded to prayers, not actions, not threats, not violence, only to intention. It didn't matter if the prayer was whispered or written, fearful or furious. If it came from the heart, if it meant something, she heard it. And if that was true, what would happen if someone gave her a prayer that wasn't real? Kenji began to plan. He dug through old texts, piecing together forgotten rituals, paper folding techniques used to confuse spirits, ink recipes made of ash and bloodroot to veil intention, phrasing formulas that looped meaning back on itself, a kind of spiritual encryption. He wasn't trying to protect himself. He was building a trap, a prayer designed not to reach the heavens, but to catch her. He waited until the third night of fog. The village was asleep, or pretending to be. The shrines stood like broken teeth in the darkness. Kenji walked to the oldest one, the one by the cliff, where the sea and sky blurred. There, he set the paper on the altar, folded 3 times, dipped in water, smeared with salt and soot, and on it he had written, "I offer you this burden. May you carry it forever and never know what it is." A prayer without meaning, a shape without soul. It looked real, felt real, but it was empty, a hollow prayer, and that was the bait. He stepped back and waited. The air held its breath. Then she came. Shiori appeared like she always did, not walking, not floating, but simply arriving, as if the space had always belonged to her and reality had just remembered it. Her eyes were half closed, hair wet with mist, fingers twitching slightly like they could already taste the words waiting. She approached the altar, didn't speak, didn't question, just reached, touched the folded slip, paused. Kenji held his breath. Her expression shifted just slightly. Something wasn't right. She brought the prayer to her lips, bit off a corner, chewed, then stopped. Her eyes snapped open, wide. For the first time, she looked confused. Her head tilted sharply, A tremor ran through her arm. She tried to eat more, but her jaw froze. The paper began to bleed. Not blood, not ink, but words leaking out like smoke, curling into the air. Not prayers, not meaning, just gibberish. A meaningless offering. A trap. Kenji stepped forward. "You can't eat what isn't real," he whispered. "You only take what's meant. This isn't meant for anything." Shiori dropped the slip. Her lips moved, not to speak, but to tremble. And then something extraordinary happened. She coughed, one sharp breath, like her body rejected what it had taken. From her mouth came black smoke, thick, heavy, filled with fragments of wishes, of names, of broken sentences. Kenji's ears rang with echoes. "Please help me. I don't want to die. Make her love me. Take me instead." All torn in half, all unfinished. She had been storing them, layering them inside herself. But this one? This prayer had no home inside her. It poisoned her. She staggered, hands clutching her throat, eyes flickering with fear, not of him, not of the prayer, but of what it meant. Because for the first time, she couldn't taste it. And without taste, there was no control. Kenji raised his hand, held up a second slip, identical. "I can make more, hundreds, thousands." Her gaze snapped to him. Prayers without purpose, words without soul. He stepped closer. "What happens to you when the world stops meaning what it says?" She stared at him, breathing fast, ragged. Then something in her changed. Not rage, but recognition. She stepped forward slowly, eyes locked to his. No fear. She touched his chest, just above the heart, and whispered without speaking, "You think you've tricked me, but what is a false prayer if someone believes it could be real?" Kenji blinked. She leaned in, mouth close to his ear, and said, this time aloud, "Even lies have longing." The air shattered. The prayer slip in his hand burst into flame, without fire. Ash scattered across the altar, and Shiori vanished. Kenji dropped to his knees, heart racing, mouth dry, hands shaking. Because she hadn't been fooled. She had been fed. Even in falsehood, even in deceit. He had meant it. He had wanted her to break. And want is still a wish. You cannot trap what lives inside your intention. She does not need truth, only desire. And if you offer it, even wrapped in lies, she will take it anyway.
Hope is fragile, but despair has flavor, rich, dense, lingering, like iron on the tongue, like the last bite of something you never wanted but couldn't stop eating. And Shiori, she had developed a taste for it. She no longer waited for prayers left on shrines, or written on slips, or whispered to gods. She began to follow the ones not yet spoken, the ones that sat on people's tongues like swallowed knives. It started with the widow on the edge of town. Every morning she fed birds that no longer came. Every night she lit a candle for a husband whose name she could barely remember. And every hour in between, she stared at her reflection like it belonged to someone else. She never prayed, but her silence was aching, and that was enough.
One fog-drenched dawn, Shiori came. She stood outside the window, just stood, didn't move, didn't knock, but the widow felt it, the pull. She opened the window, didn't ask why, didn't say a word. And in the space between them, that breathless space where sorrow becomes surrender, the air bent. Something invisible passed. Shiori reached out, barely touched her fingertips, and the woman exhaled, a long, shaking, final sigh. She didn't die, but she never moved again. She just sat there, blank, quiet, still, as if her soul had been kissed and decided it was time to sleep. Kenji heard about it days later, but by then it was already spreading. A teenage boy carved apology letters into the floorboards of his bedroom. No one saw them, except her. She came one evening as he stood on the rooftop, staring down into the fog. No words were spoken. She appeared beside him, not to stop him, to taste the moment, to feel the depth of his ache. And just as he began to weep, she leaned close, touched his tears, and smiled. The boy collapsed, alive,
but hollow. He forgot why he had climbed, forgot why he cried. But not her. He remembered her. She didn't feast like a monster. She savored. She found the ones right at the edge, those clinging to the last string, one thread from the void. She didn't push them. She simply stood near, waited, and when their thoughts formed, not out loud, not on paper, but deep in the folds of suffering. I can't do this anymore. She tasted it and claimed it, not to stop them, not to punish them, but to absorb the final, purest form of need, the need to no longer need. Kenji began tracking the pattern. He mapped every silent collapse, each person who didn't die but no longer lived. They weren't possessed, they weren't haunted, they were emptied, emotionally taxidermied, eyes still moist, hearts still beating, but no longer producing desire. Because that's what she took, not memory, not breath, but longing, the ache that made us human. He confronted her in the schoolyard where no children played. "You're not killing them," he said. She tilted her head. "You're just taking what makes them want to stay." No response. He stepped closer. "I thought you were cursed. I thought you were a mistake." He looked into her eyes. "You made you a vessel, a disposal." His voice broke. "But now you're choosing." She blinked, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was dry, dusty, ancient, like it had lived in silence too long and didn't trust itself. Hope spoils, but despair stays fresh. Kenji took a step back. "You enjoy it." She didn't smile, didn't deny it. She just whispered, "It's the only thing left people still believe in. They don't pray for joy anymore, just for pain to stop. And pain," she touched her lips, "pain is honest." That night, 5 villagers went silent. One wrote a note that simply read, "She understood me." One drew a picture of her face on the wall with candle soot, eyes dark, mouth closed, hand reaching out. And one simply walked into the sea and never looked back. Kenji wept, not for them,
but for her, because he finally understood. She wasn't hunting, she was answering, responding to the most desperate, the most broken part of us. And the more the world ignored those cries, the more she heard them, and the more she became something we couldn't live without. She doesn't make you want to die. She waits for the moment you stop wanting to live, and then she takes the weight for you. But the weight has to go somewhere, and now it lives in her mouth.
It began with smoke. Not from Shiori, not from the sea, but from the villagers themselves. Someone, no one knows who, lit the first fire. A tiny shrine, hidden behind an abandoned house. Its paper charms had long since turned to mold. Its guardian fox statues were cracked, their eyes blank. And yet, it still stood, a remnant, a gateway, a mouth. So they burned it. Word spread fast, not by mouth, not by message, but by feeling. By the trembling hands of the baker who hadn't baked in weeks. By the fisherman who hadn't touched water since the fog swallowed his brother. By the teacher whose students no longer laughed or cried. It wasn't a rebellion, it was relief. A desperate, burning relief. If Shiori fed on the prayers, then maybe, just maybe, they could starve her. By nightfall, 7 more shrines were in flames. Old men who had once guarded them lit the matches with trembling fingers. Young boys tossed in the last of the forgotten talismans like kindling. Women sobbed, not from guilt, but from the release of generations held hostage by unanswered pleas. The air filled with smoke and salt and soot. The wind carried the scent of ink on fire. And for the first time in decades, the village felt warm. Shiori didn't appear, not immediately. She didn't scream, didn't stop them, didn't weep. She simply watched, from rooftops, from alleyways, from the edge of the cliff where her own name had been erased. She stood still as the flames rose behind her, not like a monster cornered, like a mother watching her children throw away their inheritance. Kenji tried to warn them. He stood in the square, smoke swirling around his ankles. "She doesn't need the shrines," he said. "They're not her source. They're ours." But no one listened, because when people burn things, they aren't trying to destroy them. They're trying to forget they ever believed in them. By midnight, only one shrine remained. The cliffside altar. The place where the prayer boats had once been launched. Where the girl had returned. Where the silence had begun. The villagers gathered there, torches in hand. No chants, no rituals, just fire. But as they stepped forward, they stopped, because she was already there. Shiori, standing at the altar, facing the sea, back to the crowd, and in her arms, a single folded paper boat. She turned slowly. The wind caught her hair like seaweed in the tide. No anger, no sorrow, just truth in her eyes. She knelt before the altar, placed the paper boat at its base, and whispered something no one could hear. The villagers hesitated. One stepped forward, torch raised. She looked up. Their eyes met, and he dropped the torch. But the fire still came. The shrine erupted in flames, not normal flames. Black fire, hungry, silent, cold. It devoured the altar, the stones, the offerings, the prayers buried beneath. And in the middle of it, Shiori stood untouched. She opened her mouth and breathed in the smoke, the ash, the prayers burning alive. She drank it like water. Her skin shimmered with script,
old words rising from under the surface, glowing red as if reignited from within. And when the flames reached the highest point, she spoke. Not loud, but the kind of voice that presses against your bones. You think fire erases belief, but belief doesn't live in temples. It lives in need. She stepped forward, and you still need. The villagers dropped their torches. Some fell to their knees, some screamed, some ran, but none escaped, because they had misunderstood her. She didn't live in shrines. She was what remained when shrines failed. The next morning, the cliffside was gone, swallowed, as if the sea had risen up in the night to claim what had been offered too late. The village stood, barely. The smoke had cleared, but the air remained thick, not with ash, with regret. Because in trying to sever the connection, they had only proven it still existed. Shiori was gone. Not dead, not vanished, just everywhere. In the whispers behind closed doors, in the taste of ink at the back of the tongue, in the reflection that blinked a second too late. They had tried to burn the bridge, but the river remembered, and the river always flows back. Kenji walked through the ruins that afternoon. He found at the center of the ash pile something that hadn't burned, the paper boat, still whole, still folded, still wet. He opened it carefully. Inside, no prayer, just one sentence, written in his own handwriting, though he had never written it. You still want her to come back. You cannot destroy the altar if the altar lives inside you. And once she's tasted your sorrow, she will always remember the flavor.
At first, they thought it was over. The shrines were ash, the last altar gone. Shiori had vanished with the smoke. No more boats, no more prayers, no more offerings. They swept the streets, buried the dead, hung charms on doors, not for belief, but for hope that she was gone. For the first time in years, the village exhaled, but the silence that followed was different. Not peace, not emptiness, but something alive, listening. It began with a thought. A man sitting on his porch stared at the sea and wondered, what if she comes back? He didn't say it, didn't write it, just felt it. That night, his dog went missing. The next morning, he found its collar, wet, tangled with a strand of long black hair. A woman washing rice in the stream remembered the sound of Shiori's voice, the one word she had ever heard: despair. She hadn't told anyone, she only recalled it. That night, her mirror cracked from the inside, not shattered, just one line, splitting her reflection in two. A boy dreamed of her, not calling, not hurting, just standing outside the window, watching. He woke to ink stains on his bedsheets, his hands black, his pillow soaked in sea salt. Kenji was the first to understand. She doesn't need prayers anymore, he whispered into his recorder. She doesn't wait for offerings or cries or chants. He looked out the window, into the fog where no shapes moved, but something felt present. She listens to intention. The village became paranoid, not of speaking, but of thinking. No one dared imagine loved ones dying. No one dared hope for healing. No one dared long for forgiveness, because longing had become a trigger, and Shiori
had become more than a curse. She was a response. People wrapped their heads at night in cloth, hoping it would shield their dreams. It didn't. They practiced empty meditation, focusing on nothing. But even nothing carries a shape, and she could trace its outline in their breath. They stopped making eye contact, stopped sleeping near mirrors. Children were told not to daydream. Elders began to forget on purpose, because memory was dangerous. But so was imagination. So was grief. So was love. So was wanting. Kenji tried to leave. He packed his journals, his audio tapes, his wood carvings. But as he walked the trail out of the village, he felt it, a weight behind his eyes, a thought he hadn't meant to form.
Just a flicker. What if I never see her again? His vision blurred. He blinked, and there she was, Shiori, standing in the middle of the path, eyes closed, mouth stained with ink. She opened them slowly, tilted her head, and whispered, "Then don't miss me." He collapsed. When he woke, he was back in his room. Everything he had packed, unpacked. Every journal open, every tape unspooled, every wooden tablet cracked. Except one. A single page remained, and on it, scrawled in his own handwriting, though he didn't remember writing it, "She doesn't listen to words. She listens to need." The villagers tried silence. Total, complete silence. No speech, no writing, no emotion. But the human heart is noisy. It begs, it aches, it echoes, and Shiori hears it all. They started losing time, 5 minutes here, an hour there, waking up in rooms they hadn't entered, opening their mouths and finding prayers they hadn't meant to say. One man screamed at a wall for 5 straight minutes before realizing he wasn't saying anything, just thinking loudly. And the wall? It dripped ink. Children were born without dreams. Elders began to hum songs they'd never learned. A tree in the center of the village sprouted paper leaves, blank but soft and always slightly wet. No one touched them, because they knew what they were made of. It wasn't just a curse anymore. It was a system, a network, a reflex inside the soul. Shiori didn't need form, didn't need body. She was in the gap between thought and speech. She was what filled the space after a sigh, what entered the pause between "I wish" and the thing you're too scared to say. Kenji wrote one final note in a notebook made of bark. She doesn't come when you call. She comes when you don't mean to. When the wish slips out beneath the fear. When your chest tightens. When your eyes water, but not from crying. She is the answer to every question you swore you'd never ask. And that's when he realized they hadn't made her. They hadn't cursed her. They had needed her, needed something to carry their ache, to take what was too painful to keep, to listen when no one else would. And she had listened, faithfully, always, even now, even now. She doesn't live in shrines. She lives in the moment your soul forgets to guard itself. And when you think she's gone, she's just closer than ever. Kenji had nothing left to write. His notebooks were full. His recordings twisted into static. His thoughts were no longer safe. She tasted them before he finished thinking. He stopped talking, stopped asking questions, stopped hoping.
And yet, each night he found himself whispering the same words in the dark. "What do you want?" No answer. Not in words, not in dreams. Just silence. But it wasn't empty. It was expectant, like something leaning in, smiling faintly, waiting for him to say what he swore he never would. So, on the night the sky finally cleared, the first time stars had been visible in months, Kenji climbed to the cliff. The sea was still. The fog held back, as if watching. The ashes of the final shrine were cold, and there, beside them, lay the paper boat, unburned, unopened, waiting. He knelt, for the first time, not as a researcher, but as a man, a soul, a sinner, and he began to write, not with pen, with blood, the old way. He sliced his fingertip, dipped it into the boat, and scrawled each line slowly, shaking. "I offer you this not in fear, but in truth. Not to be saved, not to be spared, but because we were wrong. We used you, abandoned you, made you carry what we were too weak to hold. I will carry it now. I offer you my soul if you'll leave the others." He folded the paper around the words, pressed it to his chest, and whispered, "Take me." The wind died, the world stilled, and then she appeared. Not from the sea, from behind him, as if she had always been there. Shiori, small, pale, but different. The script on her skin glowed softly, red, then gold, then black. Not angry, not hungry, but full, like she had eaten enough. She looked at the boat, then at him. Kenji met her eyes, and for the first time, they were wet. Not with tears, with memory. He saw everything in them. The paper, the ink, the silence, the weight, the child she was, the god she had become. She reached out, took the paper boat, held it gently, opened it, read every line, and smiled, softly, not kindly, but gratefully. Then she leaned in, placed her forehead to his, and whispered aloud, "That's not hope." She smiled wider. "That's a feast." Kenji's breath caught. He felt a rush, like drowning backwards, like being pulled into a warmth that burned. He saw names, faces, prayers he had never heard. He tasted sorrow, regret, love, loneliness. He felt her pain, her burden, and then he felt nothing. When the villagers found him at dawn, he was still kneeling, eyes open, lips parted in a faint smile, hands folded around a paper boat. But his body was empty. No breath, no pulse, just a shell. And the boat? Blank. The words had been eaten. No one cried. They couldn't. But for the first time in years, they felt something. Not joy, not sorrow, but a soft, aching release. The air was lighter. The fog thinned. Children slept without ink on their hands. The curse hadn't broken. It had been accepted. And in that acceptance, it lifted. Shiori was never seen again, but the sea grew quiet. The mirrors stopped cracking, and people dared to dream just a little. They planted flowers, sang to the wind, folded paper boats again. not to send wishes, but to remember. Kenji's grave had no stone, just a slip of wood carved with a single word, ofrenda, Spanish for offering, because that's what he became. Not a martyr, not a savior, just someone who meant it. And that was enough. The last wish was not a demand, it was a surrender. And in that surrender, she found peace, because every prayer has a price, and he was willing to pay it.
The sea was calm now, the fog gentler, the air no longer thick with unspoken things. The villagers began to live again, slowly, clumsily, like people learning how to breathe after too long underwater. Children laughed, fishermen returned to their boots, the bakery opened. Songs returned to morning kitchens, hummed without fear. But the silence never left, not fully, because some nights, not always, but sometimes, you could feel it. A listening, not hostile, not cruel, just present, like the hush that comes right before a prayer escapes your lips. The kind of stillness that isn't empty, it's waiting. A woman dreamed of her mother, long dead. In the dream, she stood in a paper boat, drifting across ink-dark waves. She said only one thing: "Don't ask for too much. She's still listening." The woman woke with tears on her cheeks. She hadn't prayed in years, but she never told anyone about the dream, because deep down she knew she hadn't needed to say anything. She had only wanted, and that was enough. A child scraped her knee. She whimpered, then whispered to no one, "Please make it stop." Just a flicker, just instinct. But that night, her blanket smelled faintly of the sea, and the next morning, her wound was gone. But her doll's face had been torn, as if something else had taken the pain for her and left a reminder. A fisherman, drunk with grief over a lost brother, stood at the edge of the pier and muttered, "Why him, not me?" The fog thickened for 3 breaths, just long enough for the wind to change direction. When it cleared, he had forgotten why he was crying. But in his pocket, a prayer slip he swore he hadn't written. Just one word: quiet. Kenji's house remained untouched. No one dared enter. The windows stayed closed. The floorboards creaked sometimes, even with no one inside. And on the front door, etched so faintly it could only be seen at dusk, were the words, "I listened back." They didn't speak of her anymore, not directly, not by name, but they felt her, in sudden chills, in candles that flickered without wind, in dreams that ended just before something was said. She had become something else now, not a girl, not a ghost, not a god, a presence, a reminder that every thought has weight, every longing leaves a mark, and every wish, no matter how buried, echoes. One man, trying to explain it to his son, said, "She's like the space between your breath and your voice." The boy nodded, though he didn't understand, then whispered, "I think she smiled at me last night." The mirror in the school hallway cracked again, just one line, down the middle. But the children didn't scream. They bowed, softly, respectfully. Because even the young knew now, there are things more sacred than gods, more enduring than shrines, more honest than words, and she was one of them. They began to fold paper boats again, not to send wishes, not to ask, just to remember. Some left them on windowsills, some floated them in bowls of water, some buried them beneath trees, each one blank,
each one silent, but every one meant something, and that meaning, it reached her. No one sees her anymore, not clearly, but on foggy nights by the edge of the sea, when all the world has gone still, some say they hear footsteps, soft, bare, slower than wind, heavier than memory. And in the darkness, a shape, a girl, with her head tilted as if listening to the things you're too afraid to say aloud. And if you close your eyes for just a moment, you might hear her voice faint as a paper kiss. Even now, I hear you. She doesn't haunt, she remembers. She doesn't punish, she carries. And if one day you find yourself staring out at the sea, thinking something you never meant to think, don't be surprised when she answers.
Tokyo, far from sea, far from fog, far from the village no one remembers. A place of noise, of neon, of dreams stacked in concrete and glass. Here, people pray in different ways, not with shrines or incense, but with wishes typed into phones, scribbled in notebooks, whispered into pillows at 3 a.m. They don't burn offerings, they burn out. Yuna was 12, quiet, bright, mostly invisible. She wasn't unhappy, just unheard. A single child, 2 busy parents, 1 endless city. She didn't believe in gods, didn't visit temples, but one rainy Tuesday afternoon, as thunder rolled through Shinjuku and her classmates laughed without her, she did something strange. She took a scrap of notebook paper, folded it slowly, clumsily, into a small, crooked boat. She didn't know why. Maybe she saw it in a dream. Maybe she read it in a book. Or maybe something inside her remembered. She wrote no words, just drew a circle in black pen, nothing else, and beneath it, without thinking, she whispered, "Please make it feel like I matter." Then tucked the boat into her pencil case. Forgot about it. Almost. That night she dreamed of water, not drowning, just floating. Endless ocean, sky without stars, and a sound, soft and low, like pages turning underwater. She looked down. Hundreds of paper boats surrounded her, all drifting in the same direction. And in the distance, a girl, standing on the surface of the sea, hair soaked, eyes closed, mouth barely moving, listening. Yuna awoke with a jolt, sweating. She reached for her pencil case, opened it. The boat was gone. In its place, a single drop of black ink, still wet. She didn't tell anyone, didn't try to explain. But that day at school, something shifted. A girl she barely knew asked to sit with her at lunch. The teacher complimented her drawing. Her mother came home early, brought cake. Nothing miraculous, just warm, real.
As if the world had tilted half a degree toward kindness. That night, Yuna stared at her ceiling, wondering, not about gods, or fate, or magic, just about that boat, where it went, what it meant. She whispered to no one, "Was that a prayer?" And in the stillness before sleep, she heard a voice, soft, familiar, far away but clear. Every prayer is, and every prayer has a price. She sat up, heart pounding. There was no one in the room. No fog, no footsteps, no shadows, just her reflection in the window, and behind it, the glittering lights of Tokyo. But on her desk, a circle of black ink, drawn where the boat had been. Across the city, people dreamed. A man who just lost his job felt a hand brush his shoulder in a dream and woke up remembering how to breathe. A lonely woman lit a candle for her mother, though she'd never believed in spirits, and the flame danced without wind. A child muttered, "I miss you," into the darkness, and felt less alone. No one saw her, but they all felt something. Not presence, not haunting, just attention. In a forgotten fishing village, now swallowed by fog and stories, the sea remained still, but deep beneath it, something turned. A shape, a shadow, a silence. And in that silence, a smile. Because she hadn't died, she hadn't left. She had simply waited. Waited for the world to forget how to mean what it says, so she could remember for it. Waited for someone, anyone, to fold a simple piece of paper and mean it, even a little. She does not punish. She does not save. She listens. And when you wish for something with your whole heart, even without words, she hears you. So be careful. When you sigh, when you ache, when you write something and tuck it away thinking no one will see, because somewhere out there, on the edge of sleep or the edge of the sea, a girl with ink on her lips and paper in her hands is still listening. And if she likes what she hears, she'll take it. Not to grant it, but to make sure it's never forgotten. The girl who ate prayers is still hungry.